There we go.
Okay, so this is part one, and part one of a session about after the high-vis vests and revolution in the 21st century. So my job is to provide the context. I'm going to do two parts. One is the context in terms of the science, considering what Roger has to say about it and what others have to say about it. And the other context is the whole story of Just Stop Oil, which Mika is going to help me with. Okay. So, Roger has, how many people actually read the science there? Roger? Yeah, okay. Pretty heavy going, right? Basically, what he's doing what a lot of people have said we need to do, which is that when you're looking at an existential threat, you don't go, oh, what's the most likely outcome? You actually look at what the worst cases are, so at least you've got some preparation for it. You know, it's what they do with aeroplanes, right? They don't go, oh, it's got a 50-50 chance of staying in the air if we don't do any maintenance for 10 years. They go, well, we're not going to take more than 1 in a million chance that it's going to crash. So he redoes the temperatures, doing some pretty radical and rash things about, you know, estimates of how much they might go up. And he uses this graph, which is actually from 2017. But there's no doubt that in the worst case scenario, we could be looking at 5 degrees by the end of the century. There's no doubt that the IPCC is basically, we always knew that their methodology involved basically leaving out tipping points. And the problem with that is that when you start hitting tipping points, then everything starts to go faster than predicted. So it is starting to go faster than they predicted. This is James Hansen. And there's been a lot of controversy and discussion in scientific circles. They don't exactly understand. Like they were hoping that it was just the La Nina, the El Nino, that made it go to a high temperature in 2024. But the El Nino is finished, it's staying high. Now they're looking at other reasons why it's staying high. But basically, James Hansen has said we've passed 1.5 for all practical purposes, and it's starting to warm faster. So this is just a very rough graph. Oh, yeah, grab one of these. Okay. So this is just comparing the IPCC, which is the green line, which is clearly wrong, right? They thought we were going to get to 1.5 until, just going to need you to move your head, that's it, until 2045. That's when they thought we'd get to 1.5, but we're pretty much at 1.5 now. So, yeah, you've got to change all their predictions by 15 years. The orange line is James Hansen, who's been right about most things, you know. So based on his idea that things are accelerating, it starts to look a bit like that orange line. But again, that's the most likely scenario he's talking about. He is not talking about worst case scenarios. So the red one is Roger. And yeah, you know, he's not off the chart. I mean, he's not out of the ballpark in terms of what he says can be a worst case scenario. Now, he is a bit naughty, I think, in terms of making it sound like we could start suffocating by 2050. It does say in the small print that, you know, once we pass 5 degrees, you know, eventually we'll have a problem with oxygen. But it is a problem that we'll have in centuries. It's not a problem we're going to have in 2051. It's bad. Like, all these things are bad. All the tipping points are bad. All the stuff that could happen is bad. And the worst thing about it is that it can become irreversible while things don't seem that bad. Like they already seem pretty bad, right? We've got Hiker trapped in the floods. You know, hundreds of people, or still thousands, I think, trapped in the floods. Things are getting bad, but they're going to get a lot worse. The problem is that that much worse thing is going to get locked in while it's only this bad. So look, Roger does say, sort of, again, almost in passing, it's going to, you know, that's where we're headed. You know, we need to get ready unless we do geoengineering. And what he's talking about is, you know, he does read David Spratt's stuff, Breakthrough Institute. So this is the 3 R's. Hopefully most of you have seen that one before. It's based around the idea that it's too late for emissions reductions alone to save us, but there are things we can do to do large-scale drawdown, which can bend us down to the orange curve. But we do have to either do drawdown or have to do active pooling and or other geoengineering at this point. It doesn't have to all be bad and dangerous. It's got a bad name. But there are things that David King and various others are working on, which are things like marine cloud brightening using sea salt spray, saltwater spray, that have almost no downside and yet might stop the Arctic ice from melting too fast. So I think Roger's right that we've got to consider worst case scenarios. We've got to consider that everything's moving faster. We've got to consider that tipping points are very serious and could be being triggered as we speak. But we shouldn't give up on trying to win an emergency transition that includes the 3 Rs. It's no use just talking about emissions reductions alone at this point. One of the things that we've got to really watch out for is the ice-free Arctic. That's because, as everyone I think knows, once you've got a period where the ice is gone, you're not getting the albedo, so the heat's not bouncing back into space. But that's only half of the problem. The other thing that happens once the ice is gone, is that the energy that's going into melting the ice now goes into warming the sea. And that's how all those feedback loops that start in the Arctic, including the slowing of the ocean currents. That's how they start to really rev up. As soon as that ice is gone or almost gone. Have a change. So one of the scary things that they keep on revising is this question of how soon we might get a shutdown of these great big currents. Again, this is something that they thought would happen, maybe towards the end of the century. Every time they look at it, they see that it can come sooner and sooner. And worst case scenario, quite soon when that happens, England, parts of Europe, just freeze. Like in 10 years, they're frozen. No food. Ukraine, food basket, supposing they're not fighting, frozen. And just to go back to that, one of the things the latest paper on the Arctic has said is they looked at, instead of looking at, for the first year that's ice-free, which is quite far away probably, they looked at various scenarios for the first day that's ice-free. And the interesting thing is that there's a lot of variation. It could be sort of in 5 years, it could be in 50 years, maybe not quite that long, but anyway, it could be quite decades later. And the amount of emissions in the air are not the thing that decides that. You have already enough emissions in the air to have an ice-free day and to have an ice-free forever, really. So it's not to do with emissions, again, same problem. Emissions reductions alone are not going to fix this Arctic thing. And the first ice-free day could be within 5 to 10 years. So again, it's backing up Roger's idea that we need to get possibly into a slightly different mentality. Like we've been saying for a long time, we're in the end game. We're sort of late in the end game now. And he does talk about the aerosol problem. This is what Hansen calls our Faustian bargain. As we burn fossil fuels, we're actually putting up aerosols, which are like a shield. And according to Hansen, they could be protecting us from 1.5 additional. So this is part of how Roger, gets right up to 5 degrees later. And that's right. Yeah. Now, he's focusing, of course, on conflict, mass migration and war as the main way that people will die more than the heat. Like we'll find ways, to get around the heat. But if we all start fighting, we won't find ways to get around the war. And of course, it's bad if you're in New South Wales countryside right now. It's not really that bad here, right? It's not really that bad. But if you're in Somalia or a whole lot of other places, we've already seen breakdown, societal breakdown that goes with the climate breakdown. And there's things like this that I didn't even see this in the news. Alice Springs have just had 100 days of 40 degrees. So we're already looking at things like, people from Darwin having to move south, people from Alice Springs having to move south. Indigenous communities near Alice Springs have run out of water. Part of the things that have been happening in Alice Springs is because a whole lot of Indigenous people from little communities have had to move into Alice Springs because they've got no water. So they're just living in the dry riverbed. It's all happening. So the question we're going to be discussing after I've done my next bit is, in our heads, like how soon do we expect things to get really bad? Like, are we really seeing the beginning of bad stuff in terms of societal breakdown now? Yeah. like we're seeing, say, in America, where you could say you're getting already authoritarianism, like you're seeing in parts of Europe. Are we seeing the start of it here yet, or maybe not quite yet? And how long do we think we've got before we have some sort of an economic shock or, a massive climate shock that sort of is like the Great Depression or something where everyone's going to sit up and take notice? Because this is our moment of the whirlwind. Roger thinks that when some massive thing happens, when some massive things happen, that is when people will sort of rise up and go, how did you let this get so bad? That's if we're not all busy basically just trying to survive. This is a slight problem with that. My personal hope is that we get a bit of economic collapse before we get the complete climate and ecological collapse. So, if Trump would actually produce a bit of an economic crash for us now, I think that would be actually quite convenient. So, now I've probably already gone totally over my time, have I?
You've got 3 minutes.
Was it 15? Oh, that's insane. Oh, I'm just going to have to blow out and take less time from the other bit. Yeah, okay, because I haven't even got onto just stop oil. That's just the science context. So the thing that we're sort of here today mainly discussing is the question of mass public disruption as a central tactic. And as we all know, the main way it works is by posing a dilemma to the government, where they either have to leave people occupying the streets, disrupting the public, or they have to crack down, and then you get the backfire effect. So to get a successful backfire effect, you must have a strict adherence to non-violence. You ideally have non-ordinary people, not the usual suspects. And the disruption is seen as proportionate to the importance of the issue, to the suffering that's caused to the public, and to the suffering that's going to be caused by however the issue will play out. And because media coverage helps you and it motivates others to join because they see you making a sacrifice, they see the injustice of the crackdown and or they're inspired by what you do. So that's a sort of pictorial representation of that. There's things that are working in your favour and there's things that are working against, particularly repression. But part of whether you win or not depends a bit on the judgment that people make about whether what you're doing is proportionate. If they think it's proportionate, they think it's helpful, they think you're going to win, more come. If they think it's not, then you can lose. And it helps a lot if the public concern is high about the issue that you're blocking the road on. Because if people think, well, this is a really serious issue, then that whole thing of, well, we don't like their tactics, but it's important, works better. Now, we often see this graph. There has been like a peak, there was a peak of concern about the climate crisis when Al Gore's film came out. Then there was another peak with Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil. And often the graph is sort of left there, but in fact, even though talking about climate emergency has gone down, climate crisis is still going too bad. So this is part of the context. But the thing that we've had as part of the context in Australia is we now have got about 2/3 who think that the government's doing enough, about 2/3 who think cost of living is the main issue, and possibly COVID, maybe before that. Even though still we've got about 66%, these are rough figures, who think the system's broken and that politicians are not really looking after us. So this graph is interesting because it peaked. It peaked with concern just around the peak in Extinction Rebellion and school strike, right? And it dropped off precipitously, but this is the COVID period. I think, basically people thought COVID was more important. It was certainly more in your face, right? But the interesting thing is that it keeps on dropping down, even while we've still got Morrison, right? And then it plummets, once we've got a Labor government. So we've got a problem, I think, that, people think Labor's doing enough, but we had a bit of a problem in terms of people seeing it as the main thing even before that. Just a brief point, but even if you don't disrupt the public and you're targeting something else, you're disrupting, say, a mine or a harbour, coal port, a coal line, or if you're using shock tactics, to try and shift the Overton window, you're basically trying to shift the social license. You're never going to have enough of you to actually shut down some fossil fuel company. So in the end, you are, our friends, you are still basically trying to get the government to shift. So a lot of these things do apply, whether it's blocking the road or something else. So the start of Extinction Rebellion. How much over am I? What time?
You're already a minute over, but maybe.
Oh, a minute. Look, I'm just going to take it out of the love paradigm, please.
Okay, just two more minutes, or?
Oh, no, it's going to be 5 more.
Okay.
Sorry. Okay, so the first flowering of Extinction Rebellion was the 5 bridges and the 11 days. And that worked really well because people thought it looked like fun and they all came to join. They had stopped it after 11 days, partly and went to negotiate with the government because so many people come just to party, and of course was massively, covered by the news. Even though by later that year, there's a thing in the book called If We Burn that points out that as you're learning, the authorities are learning as well. So by the time they tried to do it again, later the very same year, concerns still high. So they had preemptive arrests and their pink cushions and portaloos all confiscated, and they went ahead, but then they had actually a way of voting and sort of making a decision. People said, oh, we're going to disrupt one of the tube stations. 90% of Extinction Rebellion said, no, don't do it. And it turned out very badly, it turned into, computers trying to drag people off the roof. And they then called off the rebellion. So this was an example of the sort of proportionality thing. It's not, because they were sort of workers, desperate workers trying to get to their job, the proportionality thing just played out badly. So this is the picture we usually show of us trying to do the same thing. And we were trying to do the thing where we were going to dance on the bridge and, make a party atmosphere for the whole afternoon. But of course, the police in Australia had already learned from the police in London. And so they blocked us off. If you went to the toilet or went to get water, you couldn't get back in again. People coming to join us couldn't join. But still, we went very well in terms of publicity. So in the UK, they moved on from sort of thing under Rogers' suggestion to insulate Britain, using small numbers to cause big disruption. Day after day, and they got incredible media. Like they got to speak to the media day after day, explaining the link between insulating houses and the risk of climate collapse. So they've fit for 4 weeks. And they've moved to a no-brainer demand. I don't know whether this was partly to do with the sort of persuadability, that people couldn't argue with a no-brainer demand, where they could argue perhaps with a whole three demands climate emergency thing. So they carried on through public anger. They did complete non-violence, and they worked. The methods worked. They were amazing interviews. They had a very easy job, a relatively easy job compared with us, because they have this incredible circular freeway. You can just get on anywhere and just completely mess up the whole of London's traffic. That's the M25. So Just Stop Oil moved on after Insulate Britain had pretty much won. But they did actually bring in a whole lot of stuff about insulating houses of poor people after that. And so they moved on to a bigger issue. And Roger's original idea was that that you'd win sort of one no-brainer, show that mass civil disobedience worked, and then you just go on to another no-brainer and another no-brainer and another no-brainer. Well, this was sort of like the second no-brainer, and it was part of this 822 network. So it was kind of a whole network of other groups all doing similar no-brainer campaigns around the world. They started off doing petrol distribution hubs, got amazing actions, but got almost no media. And so then they went on to moving to blocking roads in the centre of London mainly, increasing levels of aggression from motorists. This one was trying to get to the airport and send miss their plane. And then finally onto blocking the freeway by getting on these gantries. But all the time, of course, repression was growing, and people, more and more people were being arrested, more and more people were facing potential jail sentences. I think some of them still haven't played out. There's some still
I
waiting.
think
for
we're
court.
going to have to wrap that
Yeah,
bit up.
and
And then,
this is it. This is it. This is the end.
and
Okay,
then,
but they sort of won because Labor did pledge no new oil and gas, but they didn't say anything about new extraction licenses. They were in opposition at that point, but then they came in and took into power. So, yes, Roger is not sure whether they succeeded or failed, I think. He's got that article you might have read, but they didn't fail, the broadcast did. But he has also got that little diagram that suggests that they stopped a lot of oil by stopping a lot of licenses. Timeline. Okay. It's going to tell us more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
That was. So this thing you see here is something that's on my wall at home, and it was handed out at the resistance camp in May last year. The resistance camp was before the action period that kind of ended just off well. And it was everybody across the country all coming together and being in one place, training together, doing kind of like an enhanced nonviolence training, but also just like enjoying each other's company, all that kind of stuff. But one of the things that was really, really amazing with working with them was that it was this kind of space where like everybody does the dishes, everybody's playing games and connecting and like just being part of a community together. Because like while everybody was like very radical and cool, everybody also would definitely like make a cup of tea. And that was one of the like best parts of being there. I wrote a little thing and I'm gonna pull it up now. I'm vamping. But yeah, working with Just Stop Oil was definitely one of the like most powerful and most empowering things I've ever done, and definitely the most important thing I've ever done, right? Or it's one of those things where like I can look at that campaign and know that I did a lot of good work. And that it is just that. It was supposed to be a campaign. It was supposed to achieve its goals and then end or get new goals. And campaigns are supposed to end when your demands met or when you can't apply pressure any longer.
So you can see the face.
Oh, okay. And GSO just had like both of those happen last summer. The Public Order Act, literally called the JSO Act in Parliament, was increased state repression to like a fever pitch at the and just after we won our demand. We had one action that was like, we won on the demand. We made a intersection orange and was like, on to the next one. Unfortunately, the next one never really came because the state repression got so forceful that like soup nights were getting raided. And soup nights getting raided brings people to your cause if you can pop off an amazing action period right afterwards. It does not bring people to your cause when 20 people go to prison and there's nothing else to do right afterwards. So we ended up in a weird slump. But efforts right now are being focused on after action support because people in JSO have court dates all the way till 2028. Enslaved Britons all the way till 2027, and we're still supporting that campaign as well. And look, everybody knows that your campaign's not really over until the last court date, last person's out of prison, and like the last community order's been served. I don't say fines. But at the same time, JSO is having a big portion of reflection right now. Just because they've hung up the high-vis right now doesn't mean that there isn't another campaign coming. Doesn't mean that this community that was built isn't being held. That doesn't mean that there's nothing going forward. So it's like, it's very exciting that all of us here are looking forward to what we're going to do together, kind of all across the world right now. This same meeting's kind of happening, and it's really exciting that we get to be a part of it. And I'm supposed to do a Q&A section right now. Do we have time?
We have a few minutes, so maybe like one or two questions.
Questions.
Yeah, either online or yeah, in person.
Hey Gav, what's up?
What was the response? I think I've seen a little bit of this, but I would have thought a whole bunch of activists going to jail would have possibly triggered that whole like, blah blah blah. What was the response from the general public in the UK, and did that get anything?
So it was really hard to say because JSO gets a lot of traction in the media, right? Like huge amounts. But this didn't. All of it, like everybody going to jail, very underplayed, didn't get the cut through that all of the other like actions that worked. Like the only action from that action phase that got any traction was Phoebe and Jane painting the like departure board at Wick, I'm pretty sure. But all the other, nothing like the arrest of 10 people, the raids that happened right afterwards, the rolling raids that went on for weeks, none of that got any coverage, no matter how many media releases we pressed out.
Yeah, do you think that the change in the algorithm in social media
I think
made a difference?
I think part of it, I also think that like it's not very sexy, and we didn't have like spokes for it. We didn't have spokes for like prepared for that angle of like of this repression having this effect, like, and nobody wants to hear that story either. Nobody's inviting us on GB News to be like, yeah, sucks, everybody got arrested yesterday. I don't know. It's just not it doesn't have the same push as something else. Whereas, you know, if like a very big action went off and then, you know, you get on the news and get to talk about it and then say, and they arrested all of us at soup night a month ago and here we are, and like, you know, able to push out more stuff on your socials about like how you overcame the repression. Amazing. When you didn't overcome the repression because almost like, about 20 people went to prison. It just didn't strike the tone. And I think that it's really very good for us to know that, so that when we're a little bit further into the repression game, we know that doesn't work. Like we're not going to get that voice. So we need to craft it some other way, or like choose to speak out to our community instead of out to the public, because the public can't hear you. Brad?
Yeah, we know the jails are at full capacity in the UK. How much do you know about the action when I think it was about 100 people went and sat on the road in front of the court and they didn't get arrested when normally they would?
That was defend our juries, yeah?
I think I can't remember the exact context. That's why I'm asking the question.
Yeah.
But they basically leaned in the repression, and so many of them sat on the road knowing that the jails are at full capacity, and they basically called the bluff of the police.
It was I know a lot of people that were there that day. It was really great action. Nobody felt that there was any chance of getting arrested that day though. Like the only people that really thought that they were going to get picked up were the people that are just getting picked up kind of randomly already. Like, I don't know, getting picked up while you're on your way to soup night or you're on your way to a different, you know, thing. Like, gosh, so many people are just getting like the CCTV there with facial recognition is mad. By the way, they're trying to do that here. We really need to not let them do that.
Do you think that also something that had a big play in how well JSO was able to respond to that scenario was the fact that it was so hierarchical and a lot of the key movers and shakers were suddenly incapacitated unexpectedly, and so there was like almost a reshuffle of capacity in like those key driving roles?
Yeah, I'll definitely like I'm unpopular opinion in the room. I'm a fan of the hierarchical system that JSO had, because it was a limited like time campaign, right? I wouldn't want to live in that for the rest of my life or anything, but it does make things really effective to move forward. It's like, you know, this is, you know, you get a directive, you do it. That's great. We didn't actually have a lot of loss in the thank you. We didn't have a lot of loss in most of the like key roles for like media spokes, blah, blah, blah. And most of the people that got arrested at that time were expecting it to a certain extent. But most people were expecting to get off their actions before they got arrested, not get arrested in their 5 people were arrested at their safe house, 10 people were arrested at the fence for Heathrow, 2 people were arrested on a houseboat. It was just the power vacuum happened earlier than expected, and there just wasn't. We were expecting a bump in donations, media cycle, all that kind of stuff to, you know, this was very much a boom bust campaign where like you do the big thing and you like by the end, if this action phase doesn't work, we don't have any more money for the next one. But every single one brought in so much money, brought in so many signups, brought in so much. It was worth it to be in that boom bust cycle until we got here and now. But even with that, JSO still had enough finances to keep going another year. Nobody's lost their jobs. Did you have people work at JSO? Nobody lost their jobs. And so I don't know what else I'm gonna say about that.
We've got
Alex,
one,
yeah.
we've got one online, and then we should move into the smaller groups.
Yeah. There's a question here from Bernie asking, did they make any progress banning advertising for fossil fuels, or is that still just France?
I don't have anything on that, I'm gonna be honest. I hadn't heard anything about it, but there's a ton of advertising there still, so can't imagine it.
Great. Okay. Well, maybe this is a good point. We're going to finally get into smaller groups so you can say hello to each other. And so maybe get yourself into groups of like 4 or 5. Okay. So we're going to hear 5 from each of the groups. Shall we start off online, Alex?
Sure. Does anyone from my group want to report back, or would you like me to? I see no hands. Okay. For question 1, are we seeing the early signs of societal breakdown? How long till it gets really bad? Ooh. We all agreed that there were already signs. We talked about food shortages, the shift to the right wing, authoritarian style politics overseas mostly, but it tried to happen here. There is a creep happening here. And obviously our whole political system has shifted right. Even the left are more right than they used to be. We talked about individualism and people no longer caring so much about an extended community. They're hunkering in and looking out for themselves because of a scarcity feeling. And another thing I spoke about was the reactions to lockdowns during the beginning of the pandemic, where we were seeing that the society at large that we are in was willing to sacrifice the weaker people, the more vulnerable people, the elderly, the disabled, as acceptable deaths or expected deaths, and that is not a sign of a healthy society, which was an earlier indication for a collapsing society. And then, is it time to shift away from large-scale disruption of the public? Again, we all pretty much said yes, that with the current numbers we have, it's not a viable tactic. It was the main. It doesn't do what it needs to do in order to be a useful tactic, in the opinion of the group. And it doesn't get the messages across. It was very good at raising awareness. The awareness has been raised now, so it's not good at doing the rest of the stuff. And I think I'll end it there unless I've missed something important that one of you want to say. Nope. Okay.
Okay, so should we move on to another group? Maybe should we just do everyone online first, or all the groups
Okay, sure.
online, and then but if we can try and keep it to a minute, so about 30 seconds for each question feedback. Just
Sorry.
No, it's grand. I didn't say. Okay, so the next group.
Can someone please volunteer from another Zoom group?
Yeah,
I can do
I'll
that.
I'll do group 1 when you want me.
Yep, go ahead, Alan, and then we'll go with Karen.
All right, in 30 seconds. So of the 2 questions, we had 5 people. The general feeling for question 1 is yes, not yet, and we're going to receive no warning anyway when it's coming. So whilst people are agreeing we're on the brink of collapse, we're not convinced it's here and now. The general feeling on that is another climate event, or as as Alex was describing, another COVID type disruption would trigger a lot of the people over. And then when it comes to the second question, the answer is pretty well, yes, we have to work out what to change. We didn't have an answer as to where and how to, but the general feeling was, given the repression's ramped up, given the we can't rely on, a valid point was made that the politics is going to take so long to turn that we're not going to be able to change it in that space. But definitely we need to change our tactics, unless someone else from the group wants to add to that, I'll call that done. Thank you.
All right, Karen, would you like to go ahead?
Okay. Yeah, with the first point, are we seeing early signs of societal breakdown? I think most of us felt that it's not really immediate right now, although we do see climate breakdown. But we also noted that there's a bit of a swing to the far right in some countries, and which is sort of what we expect at the early signs of societal breakdown. Now, about disrupting the public, I think most of us felt that the public seems to be a bit switched off in terms of climate, and we feel that it is counterproductive, like doing the large-scale disruptions, and we feel like that actually is not constructive. And maybe disrupting big business is the way to go. Someone also mentioned using AI because that might have capturing that, like the social media type of with AI to spread information. And the other thing we mentioned was education campaign might be better than disruption. And yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think that's about it. Yeah, and we also mentioned with the public seem to not get what our solutions to the climate problem actually is. Like, we point out the problems, but the public doesn't get what our solution is, and that's why they feel like there's no solution. So they feel like we're not really focusing on a practical way out of the climate crisis.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's it.
Thanks, Karen. We had one more group on Zoom. Can we get a report back from that last group, please? No? Okay.
Who's it?
Okay, that's fine. We can go here, and then if there's somebody who wants to feedback at the end, then we can go there. So should we start over here, Brenda, with this group, or you're we're switching? Oh, okay, with Kathy, maybe.
Yeah. Okay.
Or,
I was with Brenda's group.
Okay.
Look, a lot of it's already been covered in terms of are we experiencing collapse? Just in addition to what's been said, people spoke about the divide between the city and the country, and how for many parts of the country, like in flood or in drought, that collapse is starting to become a lot more real, although mitigated by the fact that we always expect disasters in Australia, and also things like not the lack of response, like real adaptive response by the government, and the not sharing of the scary ONI report. And I think that's probably just in addition to what's been said. In terms of moving on from mass disruption, well, we felt we didn't have the numbers, but that we could be disruptive in terms of smaller action, like smaller groups of people that make a splash one way or another, but that it's really important to have a recognition that large-scale disruption is necessary, that we need somehow to keep that in our aims, or And people wanted to keep the slow marches going because at least they're gathering together and keeping, they're not too high risk, but they're keeping skills up. And also it was mentioned that rising tide is actually a growing disruptive movement. I think that will do for us.
Great. And should we just go from over here around, or
Okay, I think-
this is Cal? Thanks.
I think most of the stuff with the first question has been covered. Except that, yes, sort of to note that what this class looks like is going to be different in different places, like not just between sort of rural and cities, but also between countries as well. So watching what's going on worldwide is going to be important. With the disruptive stuff, people are saying that we don't want to get too attached to one mode and just be doing something because that's just what we do. That a diversity of tactics is really important. So not discarding that, but also not sort of putting all of our eggs in one basket. So don't stop doing anything, but also think about what it takes in terms of time and energy and what the payoff is. There was a bit of a question about if we are doing disruptive impact, like what is the impact and what do we think it's achieving? And to sort of be asking those questions all the time. But also noting that currently numbers are really small. A small demonstration can actually undermine what we're doing at times, and that also the demonstrations are not being treated in the same way, even disruptive ones aren't being treated in the same way that they once were, and that until there's more of a follow through in terms of like the actual threat that people power is supposed to pose, that it's not going to possibly do much. I mean, governments know that even the sort of more disruptive stuff can just be maybe just ignored. But what these things do though is they still do bring people together, they still help create community, and they still do help make the politics that we represent visible in various ways. And it's important that that still exists in the broader conversation that's happening, because if that just disappears, then things are just going to go further right without anybody noticing. And that is, I think, it. Covered it. Yeah.
Should we follow around then? Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, definitely concern with the rise of the alt-right here as well. A lot of issues, talking about issues converging, and that will sort of be a big problem, like military control, surveillance, tech taking up a lot of power, and that being key trigger points. And ultimately like a feeling that it could be really close, but it could also be quite far away. And so, but ultimately like people are already suffering now. And that more, like as it sort of gets worse, there will be more people wanting to rise up, and there's sort of this nexus of point where it'll be so bad that, that's will rise up, and hopefully that's like in time, and not like when everyone's hungry, they're going to be on the streets, right? Mass resistance, so that's unavoidable. And it's kind of bleeding into question 2, saying that people don't have hope right now, and that we need to like build community to create change, and loud disruption. Obviously, like there's a lot of loud dissent to disruption. It makes people hate you, and the cost of living and increasing inequality is playing into that as well. But there's like not enough understanding that that's, I guess people will always be upset with disruption, but it sort of still holds power. And that we're in a quicksand moment, not a whirlwind moment, which I think Jane might unpack in later, but ultimately that we're sort of like, losing momentum as opposed to gaining momentum. But yeah, I definitely support disruption personally, and there was mixed feelings in the group. I think it's important to remember that the last mass disruption that we held as Extinction Rebellion was massive. Like that last march, that big march that we held in December was huge. And there was people who marched, who like weren't a part of the organizing, were saying, oh, Extinction Rebellion's back. Oh my God, this is great. And so like, you know, we sort of felt really drained by that experience, but other people were really uplifted by it. And so we still have capacity to mass mobilize and use mass disruption. And then there was talk about using social issues to bring people along in the journey, and also mutual aid is a really important part of that story of transition. Yeah, whatever. I hope that I covered that. Yeah, do you feel represented? Great. Sorry if I went too far.
Okay. Question one, we had a bit of a mixed response. There were some people that thought that we weren't seeing signs of societal breakdown, and others thought we were. And some of those early signs, of course, of food price inflation and depression and things that have been mentioned already. There was also, I don't know how related this is, but there was also a comment about the lack of young people within XRVIC as a concern, and a number of us are definitely feeling that. But also that as far as breakdown is concerned, you know, our economic privilege means we'll be one of the last countries to really experience that as well. And yeah, a lot of the other things that people mentioned. Question two, I don't know, I feel like we might need a bit of a qualifier for what we're talking about, but, you know, we did our big large-scale disruptions before COVID and haven't really done a lot of that since. Like, you know, the March Rebellion, the Slow March was an example of that. Might be a few individual actions that cause a lot of disruption, but nobody really turned their back on disruption as a tactic, but there was talk about we need to try new things as well, and not just be locked in this one mode of disruption all the time. But disruption is clearly a key part of what we do. There's talk about we have to have an honest conversation about where we are at as XRVIC, like you're talking about the quicksand analogy. We've basically been treading, we've seen peak XRVIC 2019. We've been treading water ever since, especially since COVID hit. And the question whether or not we have the capacity to do large scale disruption other than maybe the one-off March. I don't know if we have capacity to do that in a sustained way because of what was on the slides earlier with, you know, concern in the general public is just not there. Most people think the government is doing enough. It's just not the zeitgeist at the moment, because, you know, clearly there are large scale disruptions happening in other spaces, Free Palestine being a classic example of that. And that also brought up the question of intersectionality and the importance of working with other groups. And we all have a common enemy, and that is the ruling class in the state, and they're the ones that are going to drive us into oblivion. And we need to build those relationships, and that's where we get the numbers on the street. And Defend Dissent Coalition is a classic example of that, but it's a really good opportunity, building relationships. A number of groups turned up and worked together. We got a speaking spot, other groups got a speaking spot, and everyone supported each other's causes. I mean, these are all politically astute people who understand what's going on, and people just focusing where their particular passions are. But it doesn't mean they don't agree that we're in a climate crisis. Did I miss anything? Feel represented, everyone? Yes, I know.
Okay, shall we move on? And can we try to keep it to maybe 30 seconds each question?
Sorry.
No, it's grand. It's really hard to sum up lots of different people.
Trying to do justice there.
Yeah. It's really hard. Okay, should we move on?
Before me? Okay. The first question.
Jamie, you want me?
Okay, on the first question, there was opinion that you shouldn't be talking about societal collapse because that encourages preppers. There's also a comment that we're underestimating the disillusionment in the general population. I think there was general agreement that rather than societal collapse, it's true that the American empire is disintegrating. And the question is whether China's going to fill the void in a more enlightened way. Not sure about Australia. There's also a comment about Australia still being too complacent because we've got this concept of a land of fires and floods and all that sort of stuff. On the next question, the general opinion as to moving away from disruption. However, the comment was as to how confrontational in some other way, being unreasonable, being edgy. Also, people felt more vulnerable than they had been in the past. And then also the comment that it seems that it's more acceptable to demonstrate for selfish or self-interested reasons rather than altruistic reasons.
Great. Okay, let's move on to the next group.
Interesting point made that although we're ostensibly a democratic society, inability of protesters to be heard on climate and on Palestine is a kind of authoritarianism. Some of us, a range of whether we were close to seeing the signs of societal breakdown or not. Three of us talked a lot about the collapse of farming, a huge drought currently in South Australia, the Victorian dairy farmers having to import water, reports about cloud patterns and rainfall patterns that are just as climate scientists have predicted. And remember the toilet paper during the pandemic. Fresh produce is already very expensive. Some things are hard to get a hold of. Another point was made, insurance. Things are getting hard to insure, and I think the reinsurers, the big insurers, are also getting very toey. We've seen it very clearly, not so much in Australia, but in California, that those West Coast things cannot be insured now. And that could cause a chain reaction in a neoliberal capitalist system. Tactics, there were a number of us that had a kind of appetite for using direct action as long as it wasn't violent against people, and to move over towards kind of sabotage and to target fossil fuels, target banks. Maybe I know XR doesnand individual magnates, but that was actually mentioned. There was a sense that small agile actions could still be highly effective, even if not full, semi-disruptive, like veranda sitting still had some juice in it. And a feeling that once society did start to break down and people hit the streets, we'd have more people to work with and to train up. And there could be, we obviously still value of outreach to explain to people how close to the edge we might be.
Great. Is there one more group over there, or is that the final group? Okay. Is the group online the last one?
I don't think we have any volunteers to report back from the other group online. Oh, Jen? You're on mute.
Me? Oh, look, we kind of didn't quite get onto the main question, but there were mixed views on the signs of societal breakdown. Yeah, we didn't have anything, I don't think, that hasn't already been covered.
We've got 7 minutes to show the video. 6 minutes.
Yes.
Well, that's slightly interplayed, but it's not very far if Alex can get it working.
Yeah.
Say that again?
Yeah, we're going to watch this video, which has got a little bit of Roger Hallam explaining his view on love as the way to defeat fascism. It's quite controversial, so we're just going to watch it quickly before going to the break and discussing it further later. And Alex has hopefully got the tech to play it. Do you need to get made a host or anything, or are you right?
No, I'm already co-host.
Hello, everybody. We're all thinking about Trump winning the US election. It's easy, isn't it, to go into panic mode. It's all terrible. It all feels so hopeless. What I want to suggest in this talk is that all of this is very far from being true. In fact, Trump winning the election again could well be the trigger for people to finally get their act together and create the new world we all want. Of course, there's no guarantees. I could be talking rubbish. It could well be terrible and hopeless. But what I'm saying is at the same time, there is a massive potential for it to do the opposite. As ever, it's up to us on this call, and especially our willingness to work together on what works best and to act according to the spirit of being the humans that we are. So what's the plan? The first thing we need to get our heads around is that the whole way we see how the world has to change itself. There are no shortcuts here. This is crucial. The reason we are panicking is because we've learned to see the world in a zero-sum way, in a us and them political way. There is only power, and now they've just got lots of it. And so we're done for. It's fight and flight stuff. And it simply isn't true. The way we're taught to think about politics is itself an insidious ideology, that there is only power, me versus you. As some of you know, for a while now, I've been pointing out that the foundational human need is love, not power. And when I say this, I am absolutely not saying something soppy or sentimental, some wishful thinking thing. By love, I mean it in a classical or biblical way. It is an act, not a feeling. The act of enhancing the well-being of the other. We need to give and receive love. Love is attention, recognition. You basically cannot psychologically survive without each other, without love. We need love when we are born, and we're helpless. We die without it. And when we're approaching death, we need the love of others to care for us. During the decades in between, we need it too, from a partner, from friends, from work colleagues. You see what I mean? The more you think about it, there's nothing idealist about this point of view. It's pretty obvious. And as I say, there's nothing sentimental here, because the desire to give and receive love is actually a raging desire. If we are denied it, we become destructive to others or to ourselves, and very often both. We need to start here because this enables us to reframe self-interest, as the phrase goes, the desire for power, not as the foundational need, but simply as one strategy to get our foundational need fulfilled, the need for love. In other words, love comes first. The power strategy is a deficient way to get it. It does not work, or at the very least, it is radically suboptimal. Let's put it like that. And of course, like any foundational scheme, this idea about love cannot be conclusively proved. It has a mythical element, a feeling for what it is, that we are. But at the very least, it is a more attractive view of humanity than all this us and them stuff. And as I will show, there is a wealth of empirical evidence for how it works. Some of you may know some of these examples. So, sorry if I'm repeating them again, but I think they get to the core of how we construct an effective strategy for dealing with fascism. We all know that a climate crisis, in practice, in how it's going to affect us, is most likely not directly via storms or floods. What's going to happen, what's going to do us in, are the secondary, all-pervasive effects, meaning political disruption, social breakdown, and the default taking of power by fascist forces. What we have just seen with Trump, then, is just an initial reminder of how this is going to happen. But it only happens because the progressive forces have not got their act together, because they don't get how humans tick and then fail to organize on the basis of that knowledge. We all know there is nothing more important than this, fascism in power. We all know where that leads. So let's look at some examples of how things can happen that support the love frame and human action. Let's start with something that's slightly funny. Why do fascist men stop being fascists? Yeah, you got it. When they get a girlfriend. I can't remember whether this is the main reason, but it's definitely a main reason. When people receive love, attention, recognition, they stop being fascist. In fact, there are a whole host of studies where people have consciously gone into far-right spaces, listened to people, befriended them, and then these people very often leave that space. Again, why? Because they're getting attention and recognition. So another question, what was the main learning from the recent English riots? It was when a young Muslim woman and her friends came out of a mosque with plates of snacks and gave them to the angry demonstrators. Within minutes, they were having good chats. Let's face it, you can't resist a good samosa. I use this approach over and over again myself in the 200-odd public talks I've done on the crisis. Conspiracy theory right-wing people would show up and try and disrupt my speech. I'll do a deal with them to fully listen to them in the discussion afterwards. Afterwards then, I would get them in a circle and just listen and summarize their questions. And then they would just carry on. They would be off and away. I remember probably the UK's top conspiracy guy turning up. And after sitting with him and his 10 followers for, say, 20 minutes, he got up and shook my hand. And then there is the story of me being late for a wedding. Yes, I took a taxi. The driver found out that I was a climate campaigner. He started ranting on about heat spots and everything. I affirmed everything he said, listening to all his points. And then, when I got out at the end of the journey, he stuck his head out of the window and said, look, if I could afford it, I'd buy an electric car tomorrow. So this last story is not exactly scientifically significant. I didn't do 100 taxi conversations, but there are people who have done this over and over again, and it works. And you can understand why it works if you situate your perspective within the love paradigm instead of the power ideology paradigm. The vast majority of people believe things not because they are true in themselves, but because the belief is a means to get what they really want, which is attention and recognition, to be listened to. They want love. And if someone or some operation comes along and does that really well, then they will believe what you believe instead. This is why social media opinion forming is super shallow. People will change their opinion if they sit down with a nice person who listens to them and sees things differently in a matter of minutes. I mean, who gives a shit about social media? It just can't compete with the real thing, a human conversation. I'm not being naive here. As with any social group, there is a power law curve, meaning, for instance, 80% of Trump supporters will change their view if they're listened to consistently. Maybe 19% are going to be resistant and need a good few conversations for them to at least have doubts. And 1% are, frankly, psychopathic, and they're never going to change, or hardly ever. All groups are like this. Think about prisoners. 80% of the guys in this prison I'm in should be let out tomorrow and just be given some proper support, a consistent helping hand. But 1%, arguably, should never be let out because they're super done in. In other words, we need a sectional analysis. We need to be sophisticated in what we're saying. None of this is new. The most influential psychologist of the 20th century, Carl Rogers, as you may know, discovered scientifically in the 1950s that listening to people and giving unconditional positive regard was the best way of helping them to heal and grow. It was a revolution in understanding of the person and led to a massive change in how we look at psychological distress and the need for counselling. So we need a similar revolution in what we call politics. It needs to be taken away from the economic paradigm that has dominated it for hundreds of years, all that self-interest stuff, and be given to psychology. Politics as a branch of psychology, not economics. Politics is the need for attention in the context of social decisions. That's all it is. So, what's the equivalent of a counselling revolution for dealing with social and political distress? This is the exciting bit. It is the assembly revolution, meaning listening on a social scale. I will stick my head out here and say that we are 80% certain of being able to create a mass movement 10 times the size of Extinction Rebellion using this method. Organizations that can compete with fascism with power by dissolving that power through the same mechanisms Rogers discovered through listening. At the moment, I'm working with the team in Assemble in the UK, and we've come up with micro designs and processes which, when repeated, should enable assemblies to grow exponentially to create political campaigns that can take over councils and governments. It's as big as that. I'm not going to go into all those details in this talk, obviously, but I am writing a book about it as it happens. That said, let me be as clear as I can be on this. You should not focus on the big end game stuff, but rather on the here and now. You listening to me now. The most important moment by far in creating a social movement, and I've done it a few times now, so I sort of know what I'm talking about, is the first meeting.
Great. Okay, so this is a great opportunity we're going to have a break, and maybe this is just going to stimulate some conversation over the break before we go into a bit more in depth about the proposal from Revolution in the 21st century, which Helen was talking about there a little bit. Spectre. So we're going to go into the second section which is going to have a similar format to the first section. So we'll have 15 minutes. Brenda's going to talk us through this proposal, which only came out about 10 days ago. So yeah, Brenda's been furiously reading and gathering things up. And then we'll have two discussants who will provide some sort of short feedback based on that. And then we'll have small group discussions where we'll have some questions again. And yeah, so it'll be a similar format for it, and then just hand it over to Brenda.
Okay.
Yeah.
And will you with the slides?
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Jane and Mika for re-emphasising the importance of our work and what's at stake. And I'll be speaking directly to a strategy paper that was released just at the end of April by Roger Hallam and Robin Bordenham, Lorraine Langham and Tabby Jourdan. Most particularly, I'm going to focus on what they've described as a pincer strategy, which is described in the paper, and it brings together people's assemblies and mass mobilisation in order to effect a democratic revolution. And it picks up on some of the things that Roger Hallam spoke about in The Love Paradigm. And that was a great sort of forerunner to what I'm going to talk about and what has come out of the strategy paper. So it's called We Decide, and it's a global strategy for democracy in the 21st century. So next one. We Decide put together a blueprint or a model for radical change, and it's one that can be adapted to local circumstances. So first, I'll go through some key features of the strategy, namely the relationship between assemblies and street movements. Secondly, I'll outline the integral relationship between the two arms of social change and how they form that pincer effect for the creation of political pressure, which elevates people power and creates the conditions for radical change. I'll conclude by describing what that global movement would look like and the criteria for joining as described by Hallam, Bordenham, Langham and Jourdan. I won't be covering the structures and the governance aspects in the paper in this session. I think that discussion is something that can happen further down the track. And I don't think we really have time to fully engage with the critical role that a centralised leadership team, which is what they propose, would evolve. So I think that's another discussion. But understanding what the mechanism is for the model, I think, is more important at this point. So where are we at? And at the moment, the global context that Hallam and Boardman and others have said is that we are a really, really unique moment in history. It's not only the climate, it's also social breakdown, it's also the economic situation we're in. There's a whole lot of factors that are colliding, including the politics that is unfolding across the world, and we've mentioned Trump before. And we need a new global movement. I think what we're seeing at the moment is that elections are one of the biggest barriers to change. The elites are elected, they make decisions which suit corporate interests, and it's very short-term thinking, and it's dominating decision-making. And we only really have to look at the election result in Australia, where we didn't get a minority government. Labor came back with a landslide. And then we're looking at international situations as well in the UK and then, of course, America. So the second slide, the picture on that second slide, I don't know if you can see what the placard said. It says, and it says, warning, don't let either party take what you started and make it theirs. And I think that's a really central message in this strategy. It's about not creating change and then there appears a vacuum and then we don't know how to fill it, and then it is taken over and our demands, our needs are again overlooked. So it's a really important part of any strategizing that we think about how we can actually take power, how we can hold power, and how we engage with people along the way. So the next slide. Yeah. So one of the most important things within this strategy, in this model, is an integrated strategy, and that's one that works within and outside existing political structures. So these structures require a major transformation in a non-violent revolution in response to climate and social collapse, and a key element in that is integrating sustained political involvement and mass protest as a way to drive effective transformation. We decide focuses on groups working in 3 critical areas, which work inside and outside the system and create pressure. So the next slide. And those 3 groups are those that are working on assemblies, those that work are part of the mass non-violent civil disobedience and mutual aid. So I'm going to the next slide. I'll talk about assemblies first, and that is the first pillar or the first arm of the pincer move. Revitalising an assembly, and assemblies have been a significant in all revolutionary movements. They're absolutely central to it. And while the outcomes may have been mixed, there's no ignoring that when people come together to demand political change, that has led to democratic upheavals. Once people have the means to air their concerns and their solutions, they realise they can bypass current political structures. And these structures were never set up actually, or never designed, so ordinary people could be part of decision-making in the first place. Once people realise that, then they can start to think about, well, how would I do this? How would I solve this problem? And from that comes the foundation for really long-term sustainable work. So in Spain, M5 and the Occupy movement, their success was huge, but it was limited. But it laid the foundations and showcased the power of collective action. People assembled, they debated, they formed collectives to solve societal problems, which led in some cases in Spain to new political parties forming. Or they may choose to bypass the political party, going down the political party route to something completely different. In Australia, we have a couple of examples of where local communities have already decided to choose their own independent candidates, and that would be Voices of Indo initially. And then Climate 200 also does that, where it enables communities to come together, talk about the issues that they're concerned about, and then choose their own candidates and set their own agendas and what they're going to present in Parliament and what they're going to act on. So that is the kind of way in which assemblies can work. And it's about flipping control away from centralised parties into the hands of people who have are invested in outcomes and invested in solving problems. Assemblies can scale up very rapidly, where there can be thousands run in very short periods, and there are examples around the world of that. One of them was Bernie Sanders' campaign in the lead up to the presidential nomination. He mobilised 500,000 volunteers in a period of 6 weeks. And this is through that kind of assembly model. So it is possible to do it. And the main thing that they end up doing is developing a charter of demands. So the charter of demands is then presented to, in this case in the UK, to councils with a deadline for a response. The pressure on the state when communities seize control like that and actually put safety and resilience on the agenda and then pressure for a response is quite powerful. Then there's a possibility of escalating the action, and residents can decide to do things like withhold paying bills, withhold rates, sit-ins at council meetings, supporting grassroots projects. So it's not only just about holding assemblies, it's about people learning and experiencing how they can actually take action and not be passive recipients of whatever is rolled out to them by, in political leaders making decisions. So they start to learn and lean into and are educated about what it means to take direct action and escalate their actions. And the other part of that is about independent candidates. So it's going to be 6, yeah. One of the groups that Roger Hallam mentioned was Assemble in the UK, and Judy and I have been going to meetings on many assemblies with participants coming, from the UK, from Europe, and Australia, and we've been listening to how Assemble works. And one of them, and they are an umbrella movement, which included Just Stop Oil and Use Demand. The group endorsed 26 candidates in the general election in the UK. And the candidates ran on a shared platform and they held 30 assemblies. And each of those assemblies came up with a manifesto. And those manifestos were informed what the local candidates were running on. And over 1,000 people took part in these assemblies that were mobilised all over the UK. Over 100 people then committed to taking part in the assembly, and this was cross-sectional. So there were ex-Labor people, there were people from the Muslim community, there were climate activists. It was quite diverse in the end. And they ended up standing 26 candidates who got 60,000 votes. And some of them won election. There are similarities with what Climate 200 does, but I don't want to overemphasize that, because Climate 200, stands up candidates, but they're not involved in the mass mobilisation of people for dramatic, democratic change. I mean, they are an important local voice, but that other arm is not there. So, Revolution in the 21st Century model focuses on the need to reform the democratic system, and it's critical to any radical transformation. And it could avoid some of the pitfalls of mass movements where a power vacuum develops. You need to have viable structures, institutional structures in place that are led by representatives of the people and they're ready to implement changes. You have to be ready. If you win, then what have you got in place? It's not just enough to win. You have to have structures in place so that that vacuum isn't filled by actors who could be far more draconian and far more aggressive and fascist in effect. So we have to be ahead of the game if we were to implement a model like this, and certainly that's what Revolution in the 21st Century emphasises. Next one. But yeah, okay. Sustained. The next element. Oh no, can you go back one? Because the next element is the mass protest strategy. That's the second pillar. That's the second arm of the pincer move, and it's one of the most effective ways for achieving democratic change historically. It combines grassroots organising with significant funding across countries. So this is a global strategy. It's not just a local one. It links in action across countries, and having funding to assist groups removes cost barriers for people wanting to hold assemblies, and to engage and to put up local candidates. In 2019, when XR held London for 10 days, it forced government negotiations and it formed an international movement. In the Netherlands in 2023, there were thousands of arrests and there were tangible policy changes. The people who are involved in those mass mobilisations, they're not just passive participants, they're core members who are integral to decision making, setting strategy and shaping the direction. Because if you're going to do that, you want to build lasting political change, not something that can be overturned very quickly. So I'll go to slide 8. The other part of the strategy is mutual aid, and that notion of connecting and sharing is really, really important given the kinds of challenges that we're going to face. As Helen said, many people will never face fire or flood. However, they will experience food shortages, heat events, loss of services, social breakdown and poverty, and of course, state repression. That's inevitable. And this is happening, as Jane mentioned, already in places like Alice Springs, where, 100 days, 3 months of 100 degrees is, I can't even imagine that. We go nuts after about 5 or 6 days where we have a heat wave. I can't imagine how much pressure those people living in conditions like that are experiencing, where they can't work, where they can't cool their homes, where the cost of food is escalating and their energy bills and, of course, their health. So, of course, we have communities right at the moment experiencing floods. So there are groups already working on this kind of model in Lismore. Andy, it's pity Andy couldn't be here to talk about that today. But they have survivors that are meeting regularly, and they're demanding more important control of the flood response because the government has not responded in a timely fashion, but also in a practical fashion. So residents and people that are affected are taking power into their hands. There are large examples of this happening in the UK at the moment. In Hull is another one. North, where they're running local assemblies, and the sorts of questions I've put up there. They're really engaging with people on what divides, what unites, what are the big issues, what can we do. They don't just want to talk about stuff; they're actually doing stuff. Another example I heard about was a group who in the north of England who were identifying that they didn't have a local shopping strip anymore. They were forced to go and shop at supermarkets. So they got together and they started repopulating the vacant shops. And they weren't putting in Marks and Spencer. They were putting in shops where they could mend electrical things. There were sewing machines. There was ways of fixing things. They were putting in secondhand clothes shops, opportunity shops, so they could buy clothes cheaply. Local fruit and vegetables and sort of centralised hubs where people who had mental health issues could come and get support, and they could be referred on to other services. So they were putting in the things they wanted in their local area. So these things are all happening overseas, and they lend themselves to many of the conversations that you hear here. I've got a couple more slides to go. Yeah, I know. So, is that gone backwards? No. Yeah. So, how to achieve change, the pincer move. this is probably the most important slide in terms of bringing this all together. The mixture of mass demonstrations and local campaigns, they reinforce each other. The community identifies the demands and calls for legislative change, and that involves a fundraising model. The building of momentum through mass demonstrations can be combined with cultural events. That happened with the Netherlands protests in 2023. They combined assemblies, public debates, banquets, training, networking, live music, and build a culture of engagement and movement building. And they chose strategic dates that coincided with events that are already happening in the community, so that people were around and receptive. So that was another important thing to consider. The other aspect to this too is that really there were 4 key elements in the approach, and that was that they needed mass visibility and media, and had a global event to dominate the news cycle and force governments and businesses to respond. So you're taking this from very local and you are expanding it to something that fits within a global context, and you're bringing people with you so they can see the connections. You know, a lot of people talked about cost of living during the election, and they individualise it. What we're trying to do is show people how their cost of living problems are connected to something much bigger, and the solutions are connected to something much bigger. So obviously numbers are very important. We need to make this not a fringe issue, that it's a global issue, and that international involvement energises local people and encourages more participation and longevity. And also the targeting, it's about targeting government buildings, corporations, stock exchange, and fossil fuel infrastructure. We shift the target. We put the blame where it lays, and we bring the public with us, because they can see that their engagement is focused on the real climate criminals, if you like, or the real source of their pain. And that shifts it from this, oh, you're disrupting, stopping me getting to work or school. No, we're doing this because our schools we don't have enough. Things aren't working as they should. So yeah. And the final slide, I'll just do the end then. Is the criteria for being part of this. It's very simple, really. It's a commitment to replacing the current political system with citizens' assemblies. And it's a commitment to strict non-violence as a basis for democratic social reform. And that is absolutely key. As I said, the second half of the paper does focus on leadership and decision-making and how that's organised. And it does really emphasise democratic leadership, but having centralised leadership teams, which is what A22 does have. And the model that was used by A22, but also the Dutch motorways blockades, you also use that very centralised decision-making. I think it's something that deserves and needs an in-depth discussion, particularly for XR. And the reason I've focused on this pincer strategy part of it is because I think we're already having a conversation about strategy anyway. Mm-hmm. And so this just informs that conversation, hopefully. And I think that we have limited time and we have major changes to make in terms of the way politics is done in this country, the way and the fact that we have a major crisis unfolding in terms of the climate crisis and ecological crisis. So I hope this resource provides some fertile thinking about how we could proceed for the future.
Great. Okay, so I think when we're talking about like fertile thinking, I realized I did actually forget to mention the fact that there is that the important work that the strategy group is doing. And yeah, sorry for completely, that was my fault. I meant to mention that at the start. But yeah, the strategy group, there is a strategy group which is thinking about XR fixed strategy. Correct me if I'm wrong. There is a draft strategy and there's a strategy day next Saturday. And so yeah, please come along to that. This is just like a great way to start thinking about like what's happening elsewhere, and what could that mean in Australian context. But talking about fertile ground, we'll now go on to a sort of yes.
Just another announcement we've got to make at the start.
Yeah.
Which is that Des, Indigenous leader from Western Australia, is going to drop in at some point.
Yeah.
Probably soonish. So we'll take a pause when he arrives.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Great.
Sorry, it was too much.
No, it's grand. So we've got 2 discussants for this. Yeah. So shall I hand over to Kath first? And if you could keep it to 3 minutes, is that grand?
I can do that.
Great.
Give me
I'll give
I've got
it
30 seconds to go.
Yeah.
So it seems like the directions that we could go in from here, just sort of widely speaking, are sort of continuation of business as usual, which I tend to agree with what people said earlier, probably lands us in fascist country, given just the slow move to the right that we're seeing in politics in this country anyway. An inability of a lot of people to even see that we've moved right is like concerning in that sort of regard. We've got that. We've got some sort of violent revolution, which and like I want to do that, and B, I just don't see how we get there in any sort of reasonable time frame anyway. And then that raises the sort of question of these power vacuums and what that looks like, or something like this, right? So I think it's a really encouraging thing on the whole. Love to see it. Love the idea of people being able to sort of build up their own ideas and put forward what they need to say about where they are, because I think there's just so much evidence that talking to people where they are and finding out what they need and then implementing that is the best way to get things to happen, like on so many different levels. The questions I have about this basically are, I'm still not sure either from what Brenda said or from reading the document about exactly what the relationship is between the mass demonstrations and the citizens' assemblies. Like, are the demonstrations supposed to come out?
Right. Yeah, sorry. The pressure part, I asked Robin about this. The pressure part about it is when you present that charter of demand, say to council and say, I want a response, and they don't come back with a response, the street movement comes out and says, we want a response. And the work that you've been doing, the chart, all of those groups that have all been meeting and talking, come out and put the pressure on so that the street movement supports the new structures that are developing, the parallel structures.
Yep.
They come out and support it. And the people, independent candidates, for instance, they're there supporting as well, because they've come out of that, out of the assembly movement. So the assembly movement is the street movement, if you like. It encourages more
on a
people.
really localized level. Okay, this is something that I think we need to unpack more, right? But I'm going to leave that there. The other thing that I just wanted to say really quickly is that I wonder, like topics like if you go to people and say, tell us what your problem is and what you need done, a heap of that stuff might not be about the climate. And so how do we sort of like work with what actually people want to tell us is the problem, but also get towards the climate thing? And then also, I think as a movement, we have to be having a conversation about how we deal with people who have really different points of view to us, because they are going to be in the room. They have to be in the room. So if you get somebody who comes in and who is like, just a racist, right? One of the things about citizens' assemblies is you have to be able to speak to those people. And at the moment, I think that there are a lot of us, probably myself included, who have like a really big hill to climb up in terms of being able to do those sorts of things. So I think that that's the other thing that we need to be thrown in the mix, just in terms of us like teasing out how this would work and what it would look like for us. That's it.
Great. Thanks so much. Okay, and then
Okay. Yeah, can you give me like a one tell me when I'm 1 minute in, tell me when I'm 2 minutes in, if I'm gonna do this.
Yeah, I'll do.
Putting it all the way through. Okay, so look, there's lots of really exciting bits about this that you know, some of which Brenda has sort of mentioned and some which are, I think, additional. This is actually a global campaign, and it's a global campaign that is incorporating a whole lot of other issues beyond climate, all of which are to do with the bringing down the elites in the system. So there's a diversity of campaign foci, and there is a range of tactics, but there's not a diversity of tactics in the sense that it is strictly non-violence. It's all in the love paradigm, right? So you can join this if you're, you know, working on Gaza. You can join this if you're working on housing, but only if you're strictly non-violent. I think that's quite exciting. And there are dollars available. Yeah.
The clarification on non-violence, does that include property damage?
No, but it has to be inside the love paradigm. It probably doesn't include like aggressive property damage. Probably doesn't. We'd have to tease that out, right?
Okay.
It's built on this idea that you are gonna, it's built on the original Extinction Rebellion idea. One of the exciting things early in Extinction Rebellion was this example that someone said, which was outside the fossil fuel conference, people were yelling, you know, climate criminals. But someone said, no, in Extinction Rebellion, we yelled, join us. And it's a different framing. It is the love paradigm, right? It can still, you know, it possibly can still graffiti their office, but it's about join us. It's not about you bastard, I'm going to get you. So very interesting. There is dollars available. We tried to get A22 funding, but we couldn't because we weren't the whole of Australia. But this seems like it might not be an issue. On leadership, I'm in the second. Oh God, I've done 2 minutes already. On leadership, they're looking at a balance between like a dialectic between expertise and sort of sortition, between everybody having a say and people who know what they're talking about having a say. I think in our assemblies we need to do that as well, you know, because that's the way that we get the broader issues that people don't understand, like the 3 R's, like landscape and watershed restoration, like degrowth, like bringing down capitalism. That's how you get them into the conversation. It's via actually, I think, your expert assembly, which then puts ideas to a bigger people's assembly. There's lots of different assemblies in this. There is a suggestion that we focus more on issues ordinary people can relate to. I think we can still be disruptive, but we do things like the incinerators, we do things like flooding, especially in the ponds where it's to do with the River Valley racetrack, wall, that sort of thing. I don't think we should be focusing only on councils. You know, we've got the Victorian elections coming up in a year and a half. The climate model, climate 200 model, I think, you know, is correct. We can still work though. We can add the bit in that they're not doing with climate 200, which is mobilising people who volunteered for the independence. And just the fact that it is global gives us a chance of actually leadership from the global south, which is very important. And the whole thing of it being global, so you don't do your revolution in one country and then the CIA comes and crushes you.
Great. Okay, well, hopefully this gives food for thought. We're going to go into smaller groups now. Maybe you try and find a few people that you weren't in a group with before, or someone you haven't chatted to today. And what we're going to, we've got a couple of questions again. So the first question is, what parts, we don't have those up on screen, do we? No, but the first is, what parts of Rev 21 do you see as having potential? What doesn't as well? What elements excite you about it? And would you consider running an assembly in your area? So these are just sort of discussion points. So I'll read those again. So the first is, what parts of Revolution 21 do you see as having potential? Which parts don't? What elements excite you? And would you consider running an assembly in your area?
When you say running an assembly, what are you talking about? Are you talking about mini assemblies?
I wonder whether, is it better just, maybe we'll just focus on the first 2 questions?
No, I don't think so, but I just think you need to clarify, because that meeting we went to was about mini.
I can answer the question about assemblies because I ran one of the assemblies for stuff in the UK.
Yeah.
So it's something kind of just like something that you set up, you like canvass the neighborhood, put out all your flyers, get people into a space and explain to them what an assembly is for the first time because they've never heard of it. And then go around and let them kind of talk out what an assembly is. And then those people are your original base to start an actual assembly later down the line for everybody in the area. So that's like what we to start an assembly, that's the first step. Is that
And in fact, on the love paradigm, Roger Hallam talks about you could even just make that with your friends, your social network, have an assembly and practice it that way. But there are training materials that are available now, which we've shared in the Bylaw Citizens Assembly chat, which teach you how to run assemblies and give you tips on how to address some of the issues you mentioned, Cass. So yeah, there's a lot of training material that's now being produced, and it's very accessible and very helpful.
So first, Jane, I think.
I'd like to suggest that we leave the assembly bit and how we can implement it to part 3, because that is about how can we implement this, how might it apply in Australia, and that we just stick to what are some of the exciting bits of this in this bit. Because I think we decided not to do what we don't like about it. We've only got probably 20 minutes now rather than half an hour. So if we just stick to what are the exciting bits that we'd like to tease out further in part 3. And that, could include assemblies, but there are a lot of different types of assemblies. Like that is one type of assembly, but there's lots of others.
Well,
So should we make it simple then for people, so that we just focus on those first 2 questions, which were what parts of Revolution 21 do you see as having potential, and what elements excite you? It's sort of the same question, but we'll have
maybe would you be prepared to run an assembly? Would you be prepared to run or participate in an assembly?
I wonder whether we leave that to the
we're getting to that later, are we?
I think we should have a World Cafe on assemblies. Then you'll see who will help organise them and who will help come to them. I think we need a table on that in part 3.
Are people clear as to what, because I realise there's a lot of different things going on, are people clear as to what that next bar is? So you're getting into a small group and you're discussing parts of this are most interesting to you.
We'll let's talk about Revolution 21st century.
I think we've got about 15. Yeah.
We can press something else.
No, I think we'll just go for 15 minutes because we've shortened down the questions anyway. Okay, great. Okay, did everyone get that? Yeah. So we're going to start in the room here. So should we start with Kath? Yeah.
Okay, great. So we did a round of what we're excited about, and it was stuff like it's great to have a global connection, so good to listen to people. It's so good to give people the potential to get involved in politics. It's really good to bring people into those conversations. Having connections between the community and the mass movement is really good, and great to give people a voice. Then we had a little pause and realised that a lot of us wanted also an opportunity to talk about things that we had questions about or did not feel entirely comfortable about. And we were a little bit why isn't that part of what we're being asked to do at this point? But we would like to do that. So then we did that for the rest of the time. We sort of pointed out that there needs to be probably some sort of direction or some sort of bottom line. And there's some questions then about how that gets put in place and who gets to do those sorts of things, how you work out what your priorities are. There were questions about how to be effective, because if you just have a small assembly, a demand, and then a tiny rally, it's going to be sort of something that people are going to shrug their shoulders about. How do you integrate things like the exciting thing about telling the truth into a system like this? Is it possible to work with groups who may have different ideas about what violence is? And then there was a bit of a discussion about just this fundamental idea that Roger was putting forward, that you just sort of sit with someone, give them some affirmation, and they will magically change their lives without me. Because nothing works like that. Talking to people and getting connections is great, but there was a lot of limitations to what he was saying there. And also it's quite condescending that person's just wrong. And if I just sit with them for a while, they're going to work. And then we also had a really big question about how, if this idea is this is global, how do you deal with global differences? And in particular, how do you deal with things like First Nations perspectives and colonisation? Because, I think somebody, it was Anna said, the idea of copy pasting a thing everywhere without having like a whole lot of conversations about what that might look like in different contexts and how you then connect to one another. That's like, yeah, like we know that that didn't work with XR here. Like there was a lot of stuff that needed to be unpacked there. So they were our other things that we talked about, starting for not doing the assignment. It was great, Kath.
Great. Okay, so we're going to try and keep it to maximum a minute per group, if that's good. Yeah, sorry. It's not yeah, I should have said beforehand.
You need to tell me, not my
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Keeper who actually does give a wind up signal because it's like
Okay.
it turns out to be incredibly short.
I can try and do that, but my battery's on a few seconds. Yeah, great. Should plug my phone in. That's great, thank you.
Yeah.
And okay, so the next group across, yeah, sure.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think we had a fair bit of trouble wrapping our heads around this. So someone said it feels like it's dreaming about heaven, but how would it actually work, and how much work is involved, and would like to believe that this sort of engagement is possible, but and also that it's very different from the way that we've been, had our demands and then prosecuting those demands to be approaching people and asking them what their issues are. It's like, completely different skill in a way, and again, we felt like it was a lot of work. Some people thought love was exciting, but other people thought that they found it easier just to get cross and hate people and the bad guys, and
so that's the minute.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's okay. And we talked a bit about mutual aid and community building.
Great.
And the positives of that.
Okay. The next group across, yes. Do you want a 30-second? Yeah.
Okay, we really liked the idea of a big global event and something that connected us in our global community. The people were like, citizens assemblies is not very exciting, but we'd be stoked to be a part of the street team. It's a big paradigm shift, like community versus fascism. It's potential to help build courage and community. Yeah. It feels doable. Optimistic that there's another way. Australians are really lonely, and so changing the narrative from individual to community seems important. There's really concrete examples of assemblies working around the world to depolarize communities, and so that seemed hopeful. We can't really see another way, collapse is coming. There's no systems in place to help community move through the disruption that's coming. And so providing people with this tool is actually one of the best things we can do to prevent the most destruction and starvation and awfulness. Ultimately though, just really quickly, this important point, people can be really selfish at this point. And so there's some feeling that we could end up with citizens assemblies taking us in worse directions, arrest all of the poor people or something like that. So there was some disenchantment with the idea in that respect. Not all ideas represent.
Yeah, let's go.
All right. So we talked mostly about assemblies. We're excited by them taking the place of existing power structures. We talked a lot about how we define the scope of assemblies and having topic-based assemblies, focusing on local issues, but also looking at different levels of assemblies and how they could influence the current power structure. In terms of mutual aid, we were excited broadly by that, but it's also not a new idea, but we were keen to see XR do more of that. When talking about the street movement, we were a little bit skeptical of how successful that would be potentially in different situations. There was we had a bit of a discussion about whether XR is actually the best brand or group to kind of lead citizen assemblies, given some people aren't super into us, some people are though, so we might have a think about that. But in general, we were pretty excited by this as a new proposition to take to people, who maybe haven't been involved with us before or have dropped out, or just generally people who are, concerned by the climate.
Okay, great. Okay, so we'll move over here.
That's,
Which we already.
Oh, great. Yeah.
So love paradigm generally got a tick, CAs with potential to increase numbers, join with other groups. And we thought getting experts involved was good. And we like the idea of linking the protest movement with inaction on CAs, and that will also build.
Awesome.
What a race, Christine.
You were second.
Yeah, you're still second.
Is there another group over here, or is that everyone? Okay, well then it's over to you, Alex.
Okay, group 1 consisted of Bernie, Mark, Rob, and Viola. Can one of you please report back on what you guys discussed?
I'm happy to do that if no one else minds. So there was, I think, broad positivity. Definitely, like one common thing that was said was that it was exciting to sort of have an alternative approach. Excited by the mini assemblies. Again, seems practical and doable. There was excitement about the scale of it. So it's sort of, local to a global scope, the ability to work across a wide range of issues. And there was, gladness that the revolutionary aspect of the program is foregrounded, rather than in the case of, XR, it's sort of a climate focus with revolution in the background, or A22 with a sort of piecemeal policy approach. It was good to have the, intersectionality and the sort of interconnectedness of all of the issues foregrounded, and the enemy named. There were concerns from a practical perspective about the feasibility of this with XR-Vic, just because of the immense workload on the people who have been here for a long time, dysfunction in the internal culture and such things. So just the lack of capacity and capability to do this. And there was also a question. That's it. Okay. Yeah. There was one more thing.
You can go.
Yeah, there was an emphasis that the street movement part of the equation is not just about banners on streets, but it's about a deep integration with a community, and a building of a political community, rather than just disruptive protest.
Awesome, thanks. Group 2 is Jillaru, Melinda, and Sally. Can one of you please report back? Are you even here?
Linda, do you want to go?
Oh, there we go. Go ahead.
Well, most of what we discussed, we just focused on the Citizens Assembly largely. It did just touch on mass mobilisation and not on mutual aid, but we saw the potential for empowerment, for voices, and for and global. A lot of what we discussed has already been mentioned, actually. And then I just cited the example of my recent experience with the salmon movement with Peter George, which was extraordinarily successful over 13 weeks. And it was just a mobilisation on one single subject. And that's it from us.
Thanks, Jen. Group 3 is Cassandra, Carol, and Andrew.
Can I say something? So we talked about being pleased at the idea of a global movement, but we also had a lot of questions about the assembly. So we were trying to kind of get clear in our minds what it all meant. We were a little bit skeptical still because we couldn't really see any concrete kind of way to achieve an outcome that we thought would be kind of Albanese really going, you know, this is a climate emergency and putting the whole economy on a different footing as if, you know, we were entering war or whatever, and the government can do that. It did it with COVID. How do we get that to happen seemed to us to be as yet undefined, but we were interested in the ideas. I think that kind of catches it.
Thanks. And group 4, do we have a volunteer? It is Alan, Ruth, and Jenny.
Well, I suppose in the absence of anyone else responding, we still had questions as to assemblies and more details as to assemblies. There was still a lot of questions as to is this an education, get the public on board, or is it a direction type operation? Generally, the question still has to be answered. Because the original thing was, are you enthusiastic about this? Well, enthusiastic about which parts and where. You can see, especially the effectiveness of the assemblies and how the street actions come into support were raised. There's still a bit of confusion out there as to what it is we're exactly what is being proposed. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Alan. And Will, that was everybody.
Great. So I think there's loads of we've got Des here from Disrupt Our right? Yeah. And I think after the break, are we going to take a 10-minute break first? Yeah. And then we'll come back and then have a little talk from you for 10 minutes or so. And then we'll go into sort of smaller groups and discuss some of the themes that have come out from both what you've contributed and some of what we've just been talking about today. Yeah. Okay, great. So if we will have like a 10-minute break, 15-minute break, is this? 15 minutes.
We're not even running that late anymore.
No, so 4:15. 4:15. Okay, great.
Okay, so we're coming back at 4:15. And then we'll hear from Des and go into World Cafes, and I'll explain all of that for the Zoomers when we get to it. So yeah, have another little break.
Great. So it just my absolute pleasure to invite Desmond Blurden to come and talk to us today. It just so happened that he was here during this week. He hasn't come to like talk about what we're talking about today, but we just thought we'd take advantage of this amazing opportunity because we're all gathered here. And Des was here for one of our previous big campaigns and marched with us on the streets. And so he loves working with us, and we absolutely love having him here. A little bit about Des. He is the deputy chair of the Black Deaths in Custody in Noongar, which is so-called Perth. And Des also does a lot of work with the homeless community. They had a massive campaign there where they occupied a big park. And a lot of people were camping in tents, and Des was an amazing spokes for that campaign and continues to speak for the housing crisis and people in need. Des also, you might remember from one of our very, very favourite actions from the Disrupt Our Hub campaign, where they spray painted the painting, a 150-year-old painting, and there was Des with his flag saying, this artwork is just 150 years old, but the Woodside project is threatening 150-year-old artwork, time immemorial, 65,000. 65,000, a little bit more. Marajuka rock art. That campaign's ongoing, and Des also campaigns about ending all white juries as well. So Des is going to talk to us a little bit about just maybe about whatever comes to his heart about his issues. Yeah, I'm just so stoked that you're here. Thank you so much. Been on the plane since 4 o'clock this morning, so thank you. Well, do you want to say that?
Thank you very much to my comrades, Brad, Violet, and I want to work with a lot of more comrades as well. Joe.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you very much. I've got the photo with you out in front of Flinders.
Yes, right.
And, you know, you've done very well at the Westgate Bridge. Every time me and Brad and Violet will go up there, Brad will look in the vision mirror and say, how many lanes there's? I'll say, well, I'll put the flares up here now. So, and I'm cracking up at the back and other things. Yes, I'm part of Disrupt Bar Pub. We are fighting for the destruction of culture and the emission of pollution, carbon emission of 6.1 billion tons that's going to be emitted into the air. Now they talk about target 25, target 50 or whatever, that we're supposed to be. The numbers aren't adding up. The numbers aren't adding up that they're going to seize this project and also expand it through the Scott Reef. I've been working with the CCWA over there, John Butler, and they're speaking about the Scott Reef up there and the destruction that's going to do. Together, like here, community, it is beautiful. From coming straight over there to Budja to someone like here is good to see. Good to see because ancestors, Kulin Nation, thank you for having me here and showing me love. We can do a lot of things together, and to show the people that we are standing up, such as yourself, to protect lands. Because under our law, our land was sustainable, and we, as blackfellas, that's our obligation. Since colonisation, everything's been inside out, outside in. But that doesn't stop people from doing what needs to be done. And that is to get in there. And that is to disrupt. I'll tell you now, one of my first actions, I don't want to get in trouble because blackfella, you get chucked straight into jail and you mightn't even see me because of deaths and custodies that's happening in there. So I have to be mindful of who I am, and Disrupt Borough Pubs caters for that. They know that I cannot break the law. But I don't mind testing it like a lucky bear, and I just walk out. When I know it's going to break, well, I'll walk back. Okay. Slow down now. But yeah, I'm just so glad that I'm here and I'm doing other projects as well as homelessness, because all these things come together. We want our community to be strong and to fight. How do we do that? We look after our homeless community. Because if you go reach out to homeless mob or whatever and give them something, here's a sandwich, brother. Here's a kangaroo feed. Would you like to sit down and listen to what we're talking about? Because we're talking about some serious issues. Homeless people may jump on board because we need a lot as many as we can get. And Blackpool need as many people as we can get. But I know XR, he's got mob all over the world. Who was that young fellow that done with the Stanley Life? Was he XR? No?
Oh, the painting?
Yeah.
No.
No.
I wish.
Yeah, so doing a lot of homelessness and that, because I feel that we can help them and they can help us. to join in the movement. I'll bring some healing products here. There's some eucalyptus and well, Brad can testify. I was a pretty heavy man, you know, limping. I'm now down to 100 kilos. I was 120. Joe might have seen me before when I was slow marching. I've got it bad here, but it's coming better. I might go for a run, me and Brad. So, you know, and the best thing that activists or whatever camaraderie should we know, comrades, make each other smile, make each other happy. And I know he's not trying to do that, but it's just coming from me because it's just I like to say things and just reinstate that together with love, happiness, the job is easy. The job is easy. And we did a public meeting the other day with Disrupt Borough Pub. It's going good over there. And I'm trying to direct DBH into bringing more community members involved. But we've done a meeting and we are ready to reactivate. So, woo! And we've got a few targets ready. I feel sorry for Mob over here. If Brad or Violet have any chance, I would love to go and see Gundit tomorrow. They Woodside got approved. I'm so angry about that. But I like to see that Woodside see theirs and Blurton's over here Disrupt Borough Pub. Theirs and Blurton over there with Gundit tomorrow. Theirs and Blurton over there. I love attacking from all angles, and you don't have to sit in one. You can do anything you want. Provided you don't get arrested. With our ban all white juries, I'm pushing hard for that as well. With my deaths in custody campaigns, we will reactivate that soon. We have the New South Wales up here, university, they got on our side and they started giving the all white jury black. It's not a good way to put our people away. And it's not even a good way to even put our people away. But I still need to protect my people from this colonial system that is just chucking my people in jail at will. So to combat that, I'm asking for the all-white jury to be banned. As was the case, I don't know which one it was, over there in the States, they have put forward ban all white juries. We need this here because over in our Budja, we have the socio-economic, our black dollars, high economic, rich area. Well, guess what, dude? They're going to pick the jury from the rich area. The rich area is going to ensure that our people get the maximum jail sentence, which is wrong, wrong, wrong. We're supposed to have this scales where, but that scales, that lady, she's holding the scales, it's sideways. She should be standing like that. But yeah, doing very well and keep continuing to work with Violet, Brad, and everyone here. I'll walk up to people and I'll say, put me to work. I said, what do you mean? I said, well, pick someone out of you looking at you funny. I'll back you up. I don't care who they are. I'll stand with you. As long as I don't get carried away as an airplane. Because I see you get carried away as airplanes, and we don't like airplanes over there in the West Coast. Yeah, if anyone got anything to ask me or anything, I'll be more than happy to answer.
Aren't you cold?
I just come from Antarctica. No, I'm not cold.
That's the right question.
Yes, I don't know how you can have shoes on and keep warm. Because your shoes get that soaked, damp, sweaty. No, sorry, that. But I'm saying my foot stays dry and I can walk through wet and it still stays dry. But when you got socks and shoes on, you keeping it damp in one area. No, I like to let my feet breathe.
Violet's got a question.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to just mention Camp Sovereignty.
Yes. Over here for Camp Sovereignty, and I want to support Robbie Thorpe with the mentioning. It's important that we don't want to walk into these people in their room on our land, their law room on our land. If they got anything to say, I agree with Robbie that they should be putting whatever court case that they want outside. Our officers out there, our officers there, and they are more than welcome to come and speak. And I'm supporting Robbie on that because I feel that that's a good idea. Because I'm a startup over on the west coast. Sorry, where the sun falls. Maybe something like that, Camp Sovereignty, because we need something like over there. They got it in Kingsy, Boy, Domainy. I just like messing language up. Over there, we may try and put it on the King's Park. So maybe fitting to start abolishing the king. And yeah, I'm Borley Whittier. That's my title over there in my language, which I'll translate to you. It means Perth boss. Yeah, with Camp Sovereignty is so important for what's happening now. Because I like to see over there what's happening. And our people can't see from way over there. We don't get exposed to this over here. And I tell Robbie, I would love to be there and document it and take it back to my people over there and show it to Western Australia, the colonial state. You know, show them what's happening over here, how you guys do it. As soon as Brad jumps on a video, I'm on there watching, giving my thumbs up, and love listening to Brad because he makes that video. No, he doesn't make the video. He makes the team come together.
Pay him a lot of money to say.
I'll give you change later. Yeah, I honestly see the camaraderie here. It's beautiful. You know, over there, beautiful. But to see a team working together and getting jobs done and moving, just like you know, when I was a prison officer, people grab a sledgehammer. This is our metaphorically speaking. Grab a sledgehammer and hit a boulder. If that boulder don't move, well, the next person comes on. The next person. But when that person grabs it and hits it and moves it a little, that's fantastic. A little bit of movement. But it takes all of us to get there and have a crack at it. You know, I don't know how you feel about your stepping out into unknown waters, because I know you do it here, dodging rubber bullets over here. Matrix. Yeah, and Brad takes me around to a couple of those places. He'll tell me, yeah, this is where the bullets are here, and this long DFO there or something. Yeah, this is where I got tasered. I think I have to send you over some goggles. But the level of extreme over here is up there. And I give you nothing but admiralty when it comes to standing up against these people. Because they intimidate us. They will intimidate. They will tell you something and then they want you to say yes, sir, or no, sir. Me, I just look at them until they ask my name. But there is intimidation. Intimidation doesn't work hand in hand. They want violence. We don't want to give violence, but we still want to make our point across. But yeah, I just give every one of you from my would you a clap from me, because I see you on the videos and I love the actions what you do. Until they run out, they are just wax, and I burnt my eucalyptus and I healed. Soon you'll be looking like this.
Oh. Yes. Okay, so I have the task of trying to set up this World Cafe, which will be an interesting one. Particularly the way it typically works is that there is a table hosted by a person that has an interest in a particular project, right? Now we haven't really worked out who these people are. I am one of them. I have a particular project that I would like to propose in a minute or two, which is a particular way of being part of this revolution of the 21st century by topic-based assemblies and topic-based campaigns. Are you interested in doing the little, what do you call them, the single, the micro assemblies?
Yeah, I'd like,
Okay.
I've people that are interested in learning how to run mini assemblies and how we might roll that out and scale it up across.
Okay. So we've got a mini assemblies. That one probably doesn't need a lot more explanation, right? It's about scaling up those mini ones. I'll have to explain my one because it is about topics and how they might link in to the XR project. Are there other tables that people would like to host? Like we can't really have a table without a host. So I mean, there is still the option just to have like general discussion tables. You know, I just want to continue the discussion more, right?
I would like to test our numbers and organise a big slow march again, but have a long run up to it. So maybe in September.
So would you like to have a big slow march proposal table?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah.
Just to test our public numbers to see how much more we're still got.
Big slow march.
Like we did in March last year.
All right. And Violet?
Do we?
We're
Are we just putting forward proposals for like literally anything, or are we supposed to be focusing on?
We're supposed to be looking at how this Rev 21 might apply in Australia. Well, in Victoria, really, right?
It falls under the street movement.
It would fall under the street movement. Well, sort of. Yeah.
Georgia here.
Sure.
Maybe I could run a table about kind of how XR could like the kind of like as a representative of the strategy working group, how we might start to think about that and talk a bit about what's going to happen next week and all that kind of stuff.
So what would that topic be called?
Integrating Rev 21 into XR.
Okay. Well, that's everything though. That's a
I think there needs to be some project to actually do that.
Yeah, okay. So specifically about how to integrate it into the written strategy we're going to discuss next week. So
yeah, I mean, just get some thoughts about that.
Okay. All right. So that's 2, 3. Good go. Brenda.
Right.
And Bell's here.
Yeah, maybe we'll have a table over here with Des just to talk about Disrupt Our Hub and banning all white jewelries and camp sovereignty. So if you're interested in like any of that intersectional other stuff is over here. Is that all right?
Okay. So that's about 5. Is that enough, or is there someone else who's got a topic they would like to table?
Just to say, there's not one online.
As soon as we finish this, there's going to be Alex setting up how the online people are going to organise themselves. It could be difficult. I don't know how many people we've got from interstate. You know, people might want to have just like general discussion, but state by state, or they might want to have topic based. But as soon as we stop talking here, they can decide how to organise themselves, because you can, you know, have a breakout room with a name. People can just choose to go in it.
Yeah, I've got that all. I'll do all that. You organize the room. What time are we coming back?
Well, what time are we breaking out? Let's see. We're going to break out, let's say at 4:45, and we're going to have. We said we were going to have 20 minutes, so that would take us to 5:05.
Yeah,
I think that'll be all right. And that still gives us some time to report back and next steps,
Yeah.
no?
Yeah.
Yes?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes, okay, but I still want 5 minutes to explain my table.
To everybody?
Yes,
Okay.
yes,
Uh,
because
fine.
it is sort of a proposal for the strategy group. It is a proposal, a broad proposal about how it could work in Victoria.
Okay. Could we shorten it to like a couple of minutes?
We can do it in, well, 5 minutes. No, well, I'll try and do it in 2. Give me a warning at 1. How's that?
Yeah.
Can I swap with you, Joe, so I can sit down? It's not complicated. Well, it is complicated. No, we'll see whether it's complicated and how long it takes to explain.
It's called Sacred Fire.
Oh, there you go.
Snarky.
Okay, so here's my proposal. This is for the this is for integrating topic-based assemblies and topic-based but also local campaigns into the whole XR project. Because there is this alternative which is really working with what people are concerned with, coming from the grassroots up and trying to empower them to get stuff out of the council and stuff. This is different. So this is, well, I'll go. Yeah, it's all inside the love heart, right? Because it's all about non-violence, love, and sociability. It's about this is let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 groups that, if they wanted to, could all be part of Rev 21 separately, because they're all in the end about bringing down the elites, right? The 4 in the middle are the ones that more closely relate to Extinction Rebellion demands. They're the ones I would think Extinction Rebellion can pick up. But there is a whole broader project which is all about the elites and the system, which I'm hoping others will pick up, and probably people are picking up. And as long as they're working within the non-violence, love, sociability framework, they can be part of Rev 22, 21 as well. And we, obviously they're people we already have relationships with. So I'll focus just on the more XR ones. Or I'll tell you, I'll just mention the other ones, right? So that's obviously something about, Indigenous, Truth, Treaty, Voice, colonisation, racism, the whole project. Obviously we're not leading that, but obviously we're collaborating. Gaza, obviously we're not leading it, but we're collaborating. And it brings in the whole thing about how, if ordinary people had to say, there would be no war. Ukraine, Russia, Gaza, it would have been sorted out in 3 days if ordinary people had sat down together and said, what can we do that doesn't involve killing a whole lot of people? Housing is a really big issue, and in terms of mutual aid, the stuff, there's some really great campaigns going on with housing. That makes no sense for us to leave. But to collaborate with them, there's great stuff going with purple pingers, right? Identifying houses that have been vacant for like 15 years. Is that 2 minutes already?
It's 3 minutes.
Oh God. Okay. Isn't this interesting? Can I not finish?
No, it's interesting. It's just making sure that
Housing. So they're all out. So the ones that are in are forests. Forests is a campaign that people want to work on in the lead up to the Victorian election. They're working on it now in terms of burning off. It's basically not being done according to Indigenous practices, but it's just basically decimating the forest. You can run a local campaign, getting people to talk about people who are afraid of fire, who want the burning off, to talk to people about who want to preserve the forest. Local, you can have expert assemblies where a whole lot of stuff that is not widely known about the extra functions that forests serve, which is local cooling, calming the weather, and as well as drying, right? So you can have local things, but they can link to expert things in the broader emergency project, and then they can link to Victoria-wide or national assemblies. Someone said, oh, what if people in the assembly, are all rude to each other and don't agree? It's not what happens in well-facilitated assemblies. They did them in Ireland, and they had a total homophobe on the same table as the most flamboyant gay guy that was there. And the whole art of the facilitation, they ended up able to understand each other, work together, and come up with a constitutional amendment that 80% of them agreed to. That is the point of assemblies. It's deliberative democracy. So that's forest. We can do the same with fossil fuels. That relates to the issue of state capture. We can do it with incinerators. It relates to the issue of circular economy, degrowth and capitalism. And we can do it with flooding and insurance and help bring down a crash of capitalism while working on adaptation, mutual aid and so on in the local area. So if you would like to talk about this, come and join me at the table here.
Okay, and we've got 20 minutes, so we all come back together at 5:05.
But we have to work out where the tables are going to be.
Yeah, well, I mean, if people know who's doing what, right?
Well,
So like,
hands up. Well, we know who's doing it.
I'm gonna split off now so you guys can work out your table. At the Hive, can you please unmute? Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, I'll start again. Okay, we did start off the discussion on these topic-based assemblies with Kat saying isn't this a bit top-down? And with me saying yes, but there's a role for top-down, for us deciding that there are important topics to have assemblies and campaigns on. And there's a place for bottom-up where local people decide, you know, what the topic is they're interested in. But that might turn out to be buses for the West, for example. Is that going to be really an XR priority? I don't know. But these four, surprisingly enough, we came up with reasonable agreement on the same four, which I was happy about. So incinerators in the West is a very personally relevant threat. It can involve multicultural communities that we have never engaged with before. It's relevant to the state election and it's also very urgent, right? We've got to stop these things. These will poison the whole of the West. But they do link to waste, degrowth and the circular economy as well. Forests, again, a good election issue. The winter burning is something that the forest groups want to help with right now. The good thing about all of these is they will bring in other people. Like there was anxiety about, well, do we have capacity? But if we work with the forest people, all those wonderful forest people. If we work out west with the incinerator people, we've got all these wonderful incinerator people. Flood risk, we came up with a whole list of suburbs, starting with this incredible flood risk. And assemblies there that looks at managed retreat and basically how impractical it is. Like the whole of Elwood has to go somewhere. Where is Elwood going to retreat to? Dandenongs? I don't know. So it's a way of bringing home the risk of collapse, right? It's also a way of shaking up the insurance industry, which could produce results. And the last one is fossil fuels. So that is, well, we're not going to give up campaigning on fossil fuels, are we? Right? So that means like really working with Monash Woodside, assemblies in universities on relevant topics, but that would be a perfect place to start. We're going to be doing presumably still rapid response when later groups for coal or gas. We're going to join the rest of the climate movement and going for every politician we can reach. And obviously we're going to also get a rising tide. So we already have stuff pretty much locked in that we want to do around fossil fuels, but between them, it tells the climate emergency story. Between them, it gives us a chance of winning on that.
I've got a question. When you, because the assemblies thing is all very, you know, could be anything, but not very well understood. What are you imagining in terms of the size of these? Are you talking about one big localised assembly that gets publicised, etc.?
I'm thinking with the incinerators, you would go to a locality near an incinerator, you would talk to the local incinerator group, you would post to the whole area, flyer as many as you can, have one big assembly for that group. Simultaneously, you'd have something happening where another incinerator is planned, because there's 4 planned around Melbourne. And then out of that would come local campaigns and also come a linked up statewide campaign.
One more, sorry. Are you thinking just that you would choose because of capacity? You would just choose one of these things and we'd all dive in? Because
as you link up with people who are already working on a personally relevant threat that they've strongly about, this will bring people in, extra people. Same as when we worked with the forest people last state election. We had a whole lot of extra people.
And you need like experts and trained facilitators and money for all this?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's lucky that we're going to join Red 21 to get money.
Yeah. Okay.
Rather than get just on you to do it for free.
Okay, so great. And vaguely in time. So we move on to Another group?
Your groups, you ready?
I don't know, we didn't actually about, well, we were talking about, Judy told us what mini assemblies are, and I explained the entire like giant structure of assemblies, and I basically just lectured everybody for like fun.
That's it wasn't a lecture, it just filled in some gap because this document, Revolution in the 21st Century, it's not an easy document to digest. There's a lot of detail. That's what I was reading from this morning or this afternoon. But there is complexity in there, and understanding how this relates to XR as it exists at the moment, where we're quite depleted. We haven't got a lot of numbers. Trying to understand how assemblies would work and whether that was within XR or outside XR. It may not be an XR thing. It may be something that exists beyond XR. There's some of us XR people helping for, whatever. But we were trying to more flesh out what actual assemblies are and not just presuming that everyone understands what an assembly is, because it is not an easy concept, and understanding how it works, and it's going to take some time, and this is not the last conversation. This is hopefully the beginning of conversation, rather than it's not nailed down yet by a long shot.
But in particular, this group was actually about the mini assemblies, which is what Roger Hallam has proposed as this sort of self-perpetuating, like cellular thing where you gather together 5 or so of your friends and you do this very short thing in an hour that then you just feed back into the local project, and hopefully people enjoy it enough that they're prepared to do it themselves. It doesn't require trained facilitators or anything like that. And so I just think it's sort of a simple concept, but it maybe needs a bit more explanation. I suggest if people are interested, the strategy group's interested, we could just spend 10 minutes explaining it as quickly as possible in the strategy meeting next week.
Good. Yeah.
Great.
But all the services are in pilot services assembly chat, all those resources are there already. Okay.
Whoever's speaking, can you speak up? You're not audible at all on Zoom.
My voice is starting to go. And I was just saying, in the citizens assembly chat, there are a lot of resources now about the assemblies and and training videos and things like that. And this is going to require people really familiarising themselves with the concept and what it means and the amount of work that's involved and how they work. It's not just a matter of, it's not quite as simple, but.
Okay, so just for time, I'm going to move it on, actually. Can we maybe take one from it online?
Yeah. We stayed as a single group. We did want to discuss Jane's proposal, but no one in the room responded to me to give me Jane's proposal. So we made it up. We vaguely understood it from the brief screen we saw. There were comments about how people interstate will be able to do this on their own, because there are 2 people in this group who are interstate and they're not in the same state, and they want to bring it forward to their states if they can, if we go ahead with it. But what kind of supports would they get? How would we work together with interstate groups? We talked about whether or not we have capacity, and whether or not this is a capacity building thing, or if it's going to be multiple people focusing on, now instead of just climate, it's multiple issues that everyone has to work on. And we kind of chatted about that for a little while. There was Oh, Bernie's gone. Bernie had some suggestions of sort of single issue or single solution things we could campaign for, specifically the carbon fee. Was there other stuff that people would like to report back online?
Go for it.
Alan? No? Okay, I think we had a very rambly good conversation about many things.
Great. Okay, well, we'll move on to the next group.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to introduce everyone to Naz. This is Naz's first meeting.
Hey,
And Des is so that Naz can report back about our group if you want to.
Sure.
That's what we talked about.
Yeah. Thanks for the welcome, everyone. I'm from Canada and I just recently moved here. And it was really interesting to learn from Des and from Violet about, we talked about camp sovereignty and the history behind that. And there's so many similarities I find to how First Nations people were treated in Canada. And we talked about how Violet has put her own self on the line so many times and gotten arrested so many times during protests and marches, and how unfair it is that if people of color are to do the same, they probably wouldn't be out of jail for the rest of their lives. And then the importance of white people being at the front of these movements so that they can protect the other people of color. And we discuss. Those were the main themes, and yeah, just spoke about his work to ban all white juries and how important that is, and then just how that can be applied to so many different institutions as well, like not just juries.
Yeah, just that camp sovereignty is going through. I hope you know, but most would know about it. But Robbie Thorpe is requesting that the judicial system be brought outside onto tribal land, not in buildings. Our law grounds are out on land. Law ground is ceremony. Law ground is how we should handle things instead of in buildings and locked buildings with armed terrorists that is called the police with their pew-pews. They're going to come out to us and see us, and hopefully that move in the right direction, gives Kulin Nation their law, tribal lands respected. So yeah, just want to talk a little bit more about that. That's about it.
Robbie's in court on Monday for that, isn't he?
Yeah,
Monday afternoon he's in court for that.
Yeah.
It's actually going to the court and telling the court to come out and speak to us. Yeah.
Just don't put me in any picket lines.
Sorry Day.
Yeah.
And that's a really important day for everyone in the community as well. And so the Grandmothers Against Deaths in Custody is holding a march, and that starts at 10 o'clock. If anyone wants to tile for that, just let me know and I can send that to you. And one final point, I think that it's really important that, like there's sort of this integration, or this the First Nations perspective coming up in this space while we're talking about assemblies, which really is, it feels like a structure that would work so well with First Nations people, and that this is the missing piece in our conversations, is that we're still imposing our ideas onto this land without integrating it into the injustice that's happened here and the people that are struggling here with their continent and their country. And so yeah, I would like to see like anybody who's taking on these citizen assemblies really think about what it means to include the First Nations voice in those assemblies. And as we just heard Des say, like, you know, maybe that means taking it, it's not in buildings, it's on country, it's, you know, in space that's more like ritual, because that creates a certain amount of importance and brings out your spirit. So yeah. We didn't really talk about that, but that just came up for me, so I thought I'd share.
That's important because we want change. Climate activism is not going to make those changes for our people. For our people. So to be on tribal lands and to make changes, you must also stand by the blackfellas.
What if we say it was like, we're tourists on this country, the country of Wurundjeri, and so, yeah, what does it mean to impose another government structure while we're still tourists on this country?
Correct. Go against the trafficking of our children. They got no right to traffic our kids. Go against the trafficking of our men and women. They have got no rights to traffic our men and women into barbaric conditions. Everyone breaks the law. We never break the law. That's why this country is lawless, with complicity, acquiescence. Acquiescence is agreeable, but standing up and saying something isn't.
It's nice.
The final proposal, is it, no, sorry.
I've got one too.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah. Should we go?
You go first.
Yeah, I'll be very brief. In the context of the street movement, I have some very trusted organisers from the Slow March group have joined this group, and we're going to organise for a slow march in late September. Last couple of weeks of September gives us a big long run up, and we're going to try and replicate what we did. Not the march that's gone, but the one before. And we get other groups and try and make it as big and inclusive and as collaborative as possible. So yeah, I'll set up a chat for that soon, and anyone else who's interested, just let me know.
And I'm sorry, just like with, I've got to facilitate. Someone didn't like that word, but I have to facilitate with Disrupt Borough Pub to try and facilitate to get my people on board. And I suggested we got to cook a kangaroo feed up by our mob, and we go to a suburb where our blackfellas live and get a community hall, get some damper and kangaroo, invite them to come and have a feed, and then sit down and say, this is what we're talking about. And I'm pretty sure it affects you because this is your tribal land. Can you help us? With that said, with more Aboriginal people to come on board, because I want more over there on Disrupt Borough Pub, the government don't know what to do because blackfellas got to stay blackfellas and we go in jail. But if we find camaraderie within groups, it makes us stronger.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that. I think if we move on, I think because we're finishing off now, I think this is the last proposal. And this is about the strategy. So this is also about next week and what we're thinking of for like the next event.
Yeah. Our group was not trying to get any specific conclusion. We were trying to surface some of the questions that might come up next week around, a strategy for XR, things that we're going to have to tackle as a group before we can figure out if that's something that, we want to go ahead with. So we had some really good questions, not an exhaustive list, but ones we had were, how do we decide what triggers an assembly? How disciplined do we want to be around a strategy? How will we work within our current capacity? How does a strategy even get adopted in a non-hierarchical organisation like XR? What kind of outcomes do we want from a strategy? How does leadership work in the strategy? And what is the XR way of doing citizens assemblies? So all really good questions that hopefully we're not going to answer all of them next week, but we're going to give it a red hot go. So next week, the plan is to be in this very room for a longer session. I think it's currently booked at 10 to 4, which is perfect. So we're going to be going through, this is kind of going to underpin it, but we've got a draft strategy that we can all react to that the strategy working group's been working on. And then, just really break that down, tear that apart and then build it back up again and figure out, how we actually want to proceed, if we want to proceed with that kind of stuff. So yeah, please do come along. It'll be a great second act to this day, which has already been I think a lot of learning for everyone. And next time will be a little bit more learning and then a little bit more learning. So yeah, really hope to see you guys.
Okay. I think that's us. Are people feeling like they want to have a checkout or just a little temperature check as to how people are feeling? So yeah, if you're feeling good, if you're feeling, sort of okay, or if you're feeling a bit, I don't know, low on energy, maybe something, then these are the sort of hand gestures. So should we just get a bit of a temperature check? Great. Glad. And glad to see it looks like more people have more energy than I do, so that's good. I hope this has been a good session. And yeah, thanks for so many people coming. Yeah, and and I'll see you next. Yes, welcome to new people. Oh yes, extinction. Extinction. Extinction.
And I did make, thank you very much. It's so valid, I did make.
Cheers all.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.